Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm excited to be here to talk about the state of American democracy and what Tufts University is doing to try to make our democracy work a little bit better. So, over the years, I've gone to academic conferences and I always ask a series of questions about what academics think of is the current state of American democracy. Is it working well? Is it in a lull or is it in a steep decline? And while most people felt that it was in a steep decline, they also didn't view it as their job description to help democracy not decline. And I will say that over the years, that's changed. While I used to ask that question and got no hands for yes, it's our responsibility, now when I talk to audiences, academic audiences, they almost uniformly say, yes, it is our responsibility. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that because our democracy is in trouble. There are multiple books on how democracies die. We have seen democracies die globally, and we need to be careful that that doesn't happen here. Our democracy is in decline because we have declining trust. We have increased polarization. We aren't getting along together. It's not just our elected officials. It's that we no longer have trust in each other to do the right thing as citizens in this country. And when I use the term citizen, I'm not talking about in the legalistic sense. It's people in this country. Also, you should know that our voting rates are among the lowest of established democracies. That we are ranked 26 out of 32 established democracies in this country. Too few Americans vote. Now, part of that is because our voting systems are very decentralized. Each state has its own set of rules. And what that means is that it's confusing, it's inconvenient, and it's inconsistent. And these days, there's also a lot of voter suppression. So our democracy isn't doing very well. Fortunately, our educators think that it's their job to do something about it, as I do. So I run the Institute for Democracy in Higher Education here at Tufts University. We are an applied research shop. That means that we don't just study things, we are pretty activist about what we study. And I will tell you that we catalyze change through pretty much 5 approaches. One is that we tell campuses their voting data, and we do national studies on college student voting. I'll talk more about that in a minute. We're working on shifting campus climates. Voting is a social act. It's a matter of what's in your community, what's in your water. Well, that applies to campuses too. We're closing political equity gaps. As you all know, I'm sure that not all people have access to voting. Not all people are equally represented by our political system, and we're working to change that. We are elevating the discourse. We are trying to break down polarization and help academics teach their students to talk to each other. And finally, we're talking a lot about the future and health of democracy and how higher education can shape that future. I mentioned voting. We study voting through our national study of learning, voting, and engagement. This is affectionately referred to as NSOLVE. NSOLVE is a big study. It started out pretty small, but it has grown significantly. We now have 1,100 colleges and universities participating in the study. And what that's done is give us a database of 10 million college student records for each of the past 4 federal elections, 2012, 14, 16, and 18. Now, 10 million, it's not just a good sample. It's more than half of the college students in this country. College students are a large group. They're a growing group. They're a more diverse group than they've ever been in the past, and they are a formidable voting bloc. So that's what we study with through NSOLVE. You might be interested to know some of the national data. I'm not going to go through all of it, but here's some highlights and maybe something that will give you a sense of optimism about the 2020 election. So in 2014, too few students voted. 13% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted on college campuses in the 2014 midterm election. And in 2018, that number more than doubled. College student voting rates went up 21 percentage points. That was higher than the increase among all Americans. Some of the things that we have realized from our research is that college students are registered to vote. They have been pretty consistently, but the real challenge is getting over the hurdles that they face so that they actually can vote. Too few students who are registered follow through. 53%, barely more than half in 2018. But the good news is that students were activists, they were informed, and they were excited to vote. Some of the other interesting things that we learned, library science majors, educators, they have the highest voting rates on college campuses. And so do Black women. Black women are the most consistently reliable student voters. We also find that STEM majors vote at lower voting rates than the highest, but bear in mind that it's because the high are super high. It's not necessarily that STEM are terribly low. And finally, we're finding that the gaps between different demographic groups of students are closing. Okay, so what do campuses do with their voting reports? We send them these reports. They are about 8 pages. They're loaded with data, including field of study, age, different demographic groups. And what they can do is they can share them across campus. They can talk about their numbers. They can isolate certain categories of students who might not be voting. They can certainly give the reports to faculty to energize them, if you will, to get them more involved. And I want to show you this tape very quickly. It's students at the University of Texas, Austin, on what has now become known as NSOLVE Day on college campuses.
Okay, Maya, what was your goal?
Okay, so my personal goal was to go from 18% to 35%.
Okay.
I'm going to download this document and open it. Oh my god, I'm so excited. My heart's beating so fast. 54.8? Oh my gosh. I was about to say that word.
So what happened at Tufts University? I'm just going to share with you the 2018 data. At Tufts University, 44% of the college students voted. That's 4 percentage points higher than the average, but it could be a little bit higher. It's still pretty good. The rate jumped 25 percentage points higher than the 21 percentage points that I mentioned earlier, and 55% of the registered students turned out to vote. Once again, Tufts is higher than the national averages. There's always room for improvement. All right, so what are we doing now? What are we doing? I have to tell you that when we first put together these slides, which was much earlier in the year, and when I would talk to various academic groups, I was telling them not to worry about 2020, that I thought that the trajectory of college student voting had jumped so much and that the energy levels were so high that we weren't really going to face a problem in 2020. I was telling them to focus on 2022, to use 2020 to establish activities and habits and campus climates that would then carry them to the next midterm election. But then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, a lot of things around voting changed. The big one is that students are not together right now. They're physically distanced. And as I mentioned, voting is a social act. Students vote because their friends vote. They go together to the polling locations. They work together to mobilize voters. It's an act of leadership, but it's collaborative leadership. So what happens now when campuses are remote? This has been a serious problem on campuses across the country. And so what is happening is that a lot of other constituencies on campus are needing to act at greater rates to support the students as they mobilize each other for voting remotely using social media. One constituency that we're focusing on are college and university presidents. They're busy. They're drinking out of a fire hose right now with all sorts of decisions around their finances and COVID and the safety of their students. So we were really surprised last week when we sent them an email with some voting data, and more than 75% opened that email. That tells you that they are focused. They are also concerned about the state of this election and interested in energizing their students. So one of the things that we've asked presidents to do is we've asked them to get involved in preserving their students' civil rights to vote, to check the voting conditions in their state, and to work to make sure that students are not deprived of their voting rights. That's a big ask of college presidents, and yet that's what we're doing. We're also asking faculty to step it up. Faculty are the most consistent and direct communicators with students right now. And so what we want them to do is provide students with information about the mechanics of voting, what we call nudging, little mini reminders at the beginning of each class. But we also want them to talk politics. Talk politics in the classroom, talk politics with their students outside of class. And that's not so easy to do, again, in these polarized times. So we're providing faculty with a lot of resources on how to do that, how to manage the tensions, how to manage conflict. And those things are going a long way for faculty to embed into their classes these political discussions. And by the way, we want that across disciplines. Every single discipline has a public relevance, not just the usual suspects that you might imagine, not just, for example, political science or other social sciences. Getting back to the big picture that I raised at the beginning, what we're really working on is restoring higher education's historic mission. We all know that higher education's role is to educate for careers and economic security of the country, but that's not a complete picture of the job. The job also involves educating citizens for the future and health of this democracy so that they know their rights, but they also know their collective responsibilities, so that they know that they have individual freedoms, but that they are also part of a community. This is the appropriate role of higher education. We're using voting as a way to get their attention, but it's not all they have to do, and that's what we're focused on. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Nancy. Thank you so very much for that presentation. Now you're joining me virtually, live. Hi.
Hi, how are you? So nice to be
Very
here.
well.
Thanks so much.
So happy to have you, and thank you for being here. That was a great presentation and very energizing, especially for the students that are out there watching right now. So I wanted to actually just jump in right away and ask you the question about the differences in library sciences. And, you found that library science and education majors and Black women, I'm just saying, are the most consistent voters, and they vote at rates 15 percentage points higher than STEM and business majors. And I'm just very curious about your perspective of what accounts for this.
Well, it's such a good question, and thanks for asking it. There are lots of reasons why people vote and lots of reasons why they choose not to vote. So sorting through all that is a little bit different, a little bit difficult. I have to confess, for example, that bad weather is a deterrent to voting. People at the University of Michigan, I learned today that they're handing out hand warmers for students to go vote. So, you have to take little things into consideration. But when it comes to a field of study, I think it's about this climate issue. It's about what's in the water in these departments. It's about what do they talk about in the classroom. And I think there's a little bit of gender bias going on with those numbers. Women do vote at higher rates than men. And when they dominate a field of study, the voting rates are going to be a little bit higher. But that doesn't account for very many percentage points. It's really about what do educators and library science majors talk about. And they talk about society. They talk about the big picture issues. It is a learning agenda. And of course, we all know that Thomas Jefferson and a lot of the founders founded a public university and felt that our democracy was only as strong as our public education system. So that is important to library sciences and to education majors.
So November 3rd is coming up. Elections are coming up. We're all really curious. And I think these are the biggest questions that are coming in through the chat now. And keep your questions coming, folks. But what can universities do in the next few days, do you think, to ensure that students are able to vote and that their votes are counted? What are some things that we could do?
Oh,
Universally, I
Lots.
should say.
There are lots of things that can be done. And in fact, last week we published a memorandum to campuses saying there's still time. Okay, so there are a lot of things they can do. Number one, you can find out whether your students are registered to vote. And this is, again, something that faculty can do in the classroom. They can put up a little slide and it can have a link to a location where students can check their registration. And that slide can be sitting there as the students enter the remote classroom. And while they're sitting down, they just push that slide, and then they are taken to a website where they can put in their name and their zip code, and they will see whether they are registered. If students are not registered, it is too late in some states, but not all states. Many states have same-day voter registration and voting, and that is a very important reform that I think we need nationwide. We can also prepare our students for the issues. Talk to them about what are the positions. Talk to them about what's at stake. We have lots of guides on our website, and we're directing other people to other people's websites where there are pro-con discussions. What are the pros? What are the candidate positions? What is at stake when it comes to the environment? What's at stake when it comes to a whole lot. Students care about issues deeply these days, and they are very activists. And as a result, what we need to be doing is talking about the issues they care about. Surprisingly, they are the same issues that everybody cares about. They want to know, is the economy strong? Are they going to be able to get jobs? Can they afford the rest of their college? But they also, and of course, the environment. They are also deeply immersed in the equity work with Black Lives Matter and the very volatile situation that we're seeing around the treatment of peaceful protesters. This is something that is really very high on the minds of college students. So issue activism, talking about those issues. We're also asking professors to start thinking about the morning after and how they're going to talk about the election. This was something that did not happen in 2016. We put out all sorts of memos saying you're not ready for 2016. And so this time around, I think campuses are thinking more about it, but they're trying to figure out what to do. And one thing that students don't appreciate is when they walk into a classroom after an election day or after a very big public event, and they are met with radio silence. So professors need to carve out space for these conversations. Those are just some of the many things that we're asking campuses to do.
And this gets to there's several questions coming through here. And so I wanted to actually get to another one, which came up a couple of times around voter suppression. We talk about voter suppression more broadly in the American politic and the electorate. But are there particular elements of voter suppression that apply to college students? It hadn't occurred to me until I saw this question, but of course there must be. I'm curious what you're seeing.
Absolutely. And frankly, it's getting worse. There used to be sort of a feeling that college students didn't vote, so why bother? And yet now I think that that has changed, and we see this big jump in 2018. And with the big jump in 2018 comes a big acts of voter suppression. There's one thing that you need to understand, and that is that our nation's voting systems are very complicated, inconsistent, constantly changing. There are hundreds of lawsuits pending right now around voting conditions and how votes are going to be counted, when the deadlines are. These are pending right now. We're 1 week away from the election, and there are some campuses that aren't even really sure what the rules are going to be. So what happens when you have a lot of confusion is it suppresses the vote. When you add to that mix a high level of inconvenience, it suppresses the vote. So just let's take, for example, student IDs. There are some states where you don't even need an ID. You can just walk in and vote. And then there are other states that have very strict identification requirements. Bear in mind that for college students, they don't just need to prove their identity. Like I go to vote and I just have to prove I'm Nancy Thomas and here's my driver's license and I live here. Students have a dual burden of proof. They have to prove their identity and they also, in many cases, have to prove that they have the right to vote there. And so this issue of residency is highly controversial, and more and more states are finding it as a way that they can suppress the vote. We're working with various organizations. We convened the Fair Election Center, the ACLU, the Lawyers Committee. We've been taking a systemic approach to it and trying to get people together. And we issued a memorandum on the barriers to voting and ways to overcome those barriers. And voter suppression there's a very fine line between extreme inconvenience and voter suppression.
Yeah, very, very true and very important to understand. In the last minute that we have about a minute and a half left, Nancy, but I wanted to ask you a slightly different final question, which is, where do we go from here? What should we be focusing on when it comes to student voting and civic engagement? Can you give us some final thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, one thing that I think we see right now is tremendous student leadership. And that is great news. You know, this idea that campuses should be spirited and sort of electrifying places around elections. That's just got to happen. And students do it the best. They are the best at mobilizing each other. The problem with students is they leave. And so where we need to be focusing our energies is with the people they leave behind, the administrators, the staff, and the faculty. And the systemic changes that we need have to be in the behaviors of those groups because they don't leave quite as frequently and they can do things that become part of the DNA of an organization, part of what's in the water. We can change the way we teach. We can change the way the priorities of the academic side of the house. We can bolster civic learning across the curriculum. Civic learning needs to be embedded in every discipline. So with those, that's where we are focusing our energies. We're really looking at to Alnor's point, the ecosystem. We are working with national associations all down in Washington, and that spreads out everywhere. And what we're really going for is large scale systemic shift in what higher education believes its priorities to be.
I couldn't end on a more poignant and perfect note, Nancy. Thank you so very much for that presentation and for that question and answer session. I think all three of these show the systemic change that Tufts is trying to make, so thank you very much.